morning. It's 2025, new year, new challenges, new project. I want to get back to basics. I want to talk about these things. Bases. Can we take something as innocuous as this and change it to look something like this? So, kicking things off, want to just say that there are plenty of options in terms of products out there on the market that you can use. This particular one is a clay mould putty. Happened to pick up whilst I was in Spain for the grand sum of €2. We all know that Games Workshop have their own green stuff. Milliput is also a fantastic alternative, but again, doing something that's relatively cheap and inexpensive. And right off the bat, I'm just going to go and point out and say I'm not going to spend 15 quid on one of those holders. A little bit of wood from B&Q. Again, I could probably make about 15 for the price I've just spent doing this one. Again, with this clay, it's just a case of pushing it all into place, making sure that everything's pressed right up against the edge of the base, just so you've got a nice, consistent and flush finish. It really doesn't take that much, just work it around gently. Once you're happy with the final product, the good thing about this is that it's got a fantastic drying time. My assistant is now going to hand me, thank you, some tin foil, and the main reason for this is a little strip of tin foil crinkled up into a little ball, and with this we can just create a nice, easy, natural earth texture, again without breaking the bank, without spending too much time. And the beauty is you can keep going until you're happy with the final product. As you work your way around, just make sure to clean up the edges as you go. The more work that you put in now just to keep everything clean and tidy, the less that you're going to have to work at the end to neaten everything back up. And with all that done, once you're happy with the composition, I'm now going to start adding in some additional textures. I've got some Citadel Fine Sand basing medium, as well as these little bits. I've had these for about 8 years. They're Astra Militarum Space Marine resin pieces, I think. Great little bits, but there's a reason they're probably left over. They're a little chunky for 32mm bases. But again, we're going to work with what we've got, and again, just adding a different level of variety in texture just adds to that little depth of realism. Now, one of the main focus pieces that I'm going to be using in this particular army are going to be these little slate pieces. Great little things from Citadel, but again, any other vendor will sell them for probably a fraction of the price. I've had these for absolutely ages, just haven't used them because there's so many. Now, bringing everything together, I'm going to be running these as a 5. Let me know your thoughts. Are you running more than 5? I've seen people say 8, but again, opinions vary. But yeah, interested to hear what people think. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to be running for 5. And now bringing these bits together. The drying time on this mold is about 2 hours. So I'm just going to press these into place, just to get it into a position where I'm happy with where they're sitting, to make sure that they're even. And again, it leaves the impressions so you can see where to avoid on the base. And then just gradually working your way around, selecting some kind of keystone areas, and just taking your time, gently working them into place. Just try and make something that looks natural. Being gentle as you apply it, again, just try and bring up some little bits of putty just to support those little bits that overhang, and just find something for you that works. As we go through, I will be reinforcing these with a bit of PVA later on, and just adding that little bit of variety of texture. Again, it's up to you. You don't have to add all of these bits. I generally tend to add 5, but the choice is entirely yours, depending on what theme you're going for and what kind of terrain you're actually looking for. Again, this is just based off of quite a rocky, deserty type terrain, and I'm going to bring in some additional textures with these. Again, Games Workshop, eat your heart out. I picked that particular box up for about €1. Again, our friends over on the continent in Europe are quite lucky, but again, everything over here in the UK, you can probably get something equivalent from like Hobbycraft. So don't be afraid to venture slightly further afield. You're not confined to Games Workshop. Again, go in your garden, you'll probably get something that's just as good in part. But just a word of warning, if you are taking anything from outdoors, make sure it's disinfected. Boil it, cook it, do whatever you need to just to make sure that it's safe. And ultimately, it's not going to mess up with any of the paints or moulds that you're going to be using as you go through. In terms of this one, I think that's probably enough. I don't want to add too much to it because I'm conscious that it may interfere with the model itself if I add too much more. So I'm just going to go and test fit this particular piece just to see how that looks. Yeah, just tweaking that as we go through. This particular stone is actually interfering with the foot. And again, great drying time, so I don't need to rush to do this. But I'm just going to have to go through and repeat these bits for the remaining four. And with all that done, this is the first one that we finished. So it's had about 2.5 hours to dry. Just let it air dry naturally. It gets that white grey chalky texture. And basically from here we can now start adding in the additional texture elements. So I've got some Citadel sand and basing medium. Just adding that degree of variety to the base, just so it adds a little bit more of interest. I like to make sure that everything is unique. I do get bored quite easily if everything is the same, hence probably why I do this, to be honest. So I'm just going to throw in some PVA as we go, and we're going to spread it around naturally, just to see where it fits best. Just dipping it into the basing medium. And one of the main things I try and bear in mind here is that I am going for a rocky, deserty texture. The whole purpose behind this was to recreate the de facto homeworld of Bot. And if you're into your lore, you know that this is a very arid volcanic planet, and all I'm trying to do is just recreate that, just making it as rocky and as natural as we really can. Now, you don't just have to add some rock. I do want to add a little bit of variety. And if you're willing to shop around and really dig, you can find something like this. Now, this was a euro. I can probably do at least 300 models with this. And the reason that I'm after this is because it's got a good earthy, natural root looking texture. And again, it's just going to be useful for something that is dead or dying. Now, if you compare that to something like the grass tufts from Citadel, you're going to be paying about 10 quid for about 120 pieces. Compare that again to Element Games. For about £4, you'll get about 115. But GW, please don't think that I'm knocking. Your stuff is very, very good, but it is expensive, and especially when you need a horde army. Tyranid players, I feel for you. And the same processes that we followed before, just add in kind of a random pattern, dipping into the basing mediums as we need, and working our way just to find a particular piece that works. We don't want anything too big. Again, it's got to be kind of natural and reflective of the size. After all, this isn't a diorama. We're working with 28-32mm bases for the most part, but it's just putting something on there. It just adds that bit of interest. When I started doing this a few years back, I ended up getting more comments on the bases than I did for the models. Not really too sure what that says about my models, to be honest. But again, it's that level of variety and interest for me personally that keeps it different. And I don't want everything to look the same. As long as it's consistent, that's generally the main focus. But as we go, just make sure that you keep it as clean as you can, removing any PVA and any excess from the rim of the base, because when you come to paint it, you're going to start to notice it if you don't touch it up now. And as if by magic, this is it. The first 5 are done, all completed with the same methods. Tried to randomise the placing of stones and focal points on the base. And yeah, happy with how these turned out. As we go, just make sure that you are test fitting the individual models, remembering which one goes onto which base. This particular one, especially for world eaters, really dynamic poses, which is going to make it interesting when it comes to paint, because I generally paint in sub-assemblies, so I'm going to have to pin the majority of these. But keeping them separate ultimately means we have a little more freedom when it comes to painting the model and the bases themselves. We're not too worried about overspray or having to neaten anything up as we go. And ultimately, as long as you're happy with all that, the next step is to paint. Okay, day 2. PVA has dried overnight, and you'll also notice that I've primed these, so everything is good and dry. I'm happy with the consistency. So I'm going to start out with this, the Dark Future box set from Squidmar, mainly because I'm after the Parasite Brown, but also the Ice Yellow is going to be probably the highlight colour I'm going to bring in. I'm going to start by applying this brown through an airbrush. Again, there's no model to worry about here. There's nothing else on the base at this moment in time. Because the grass textures are quite soft, the airbrush really is ideal for this, just to add in that colour instead of having to use a brush to do the work. Now I'm going for an arid, deserty type texture, so the wood itself is going to be dead or dying, so it doesn't need to have any greenery to it. So a nice pale muted brown colour is going to be ideal for this, and the Parasite Brown really is a good mid-tone. Now with that in place, I'm happy with how that looks, and again, just going to make sure that we're happy with the consistency, and then really to get that red brown texture that we're trying to recreate the feel for, I'm going to do a mix of some burnt brown with some Wazdaka red. And looking back in hindsight, I probably could have pushed the red or orange just a little bit more, just to recreate what I'd originally had anticipated. But never mind, it's a work in progress. But to really push the tones up on the wood texture, going to bring in some straight Parasite Brown. I'm going to mix in some Ice Yellows just for those very tip highlights. And all we're going to do is mix them together, focusing on the higher elements, being mindful that the sun is only going to be catching one part. So I'm going to focus the highlights onto one side of the model, and the opposite side is going to catch those darker, more muted tones, just to really sell kind of the OSL element. As you're going to go through, I generally try and avoid painting in straight lines. I want kind of a woody texture, so I'm going to use a stippling motion. And this is it. After a few minutes of work, making sure that both of the models in this squad are the same, the next thing really to focus on is the dry brushing to bring up the highlights on the other areas. So the general principle for dry brushing is using a very fine amount. Any kind of short-haired brush works very well. This particular brush used to belong to my wife. I did double check with her that she's okay for me to use it. She doesn't want it back. Not that you'd want to after you've had paint on this, but anything from Citadel or from any of the other vendors work incredibly well. As long as it's kind of a short, tight-haired brush, working the majority of the paint off onto a microfiber or a towel. All that we're trying to do is just very gradually, very lightly build up those highlights, and doing it this way, especially for bases, very quick, very easy, and very effective, especially for stone and ground textures. This is really the way to do it. So again, working with those browns and with the yellows, you can just see that it starts to pick up those tones nicely. Now for the stone texture and colour, I'm going to be starting off with German grey. Any grey will work absolutely fine. Doesn't even need to be grey, you can make your own. But this is Vallejo's German grey. It's a nice deep slate colour. Going to add in some Pro Acryl bold titanium white. And then lastly, I'm going to introduce some Karak stone just as an ivory tone, just so that the transition between the lights and darks aren't too much, effectively acting as a mid-tone for this. So just going to grab a bit out. You may have noticed this in a standard wet palette. I just managed to grab something from Home Bargains, and I thought, why not? Why spend £30+ on a wet palette when I've got something at home that I can probably do for about £4. But with this, I'm just going to introduce the grey as the base tone, just being selective around what rocks that we're going to pick out. You can pick as many or as few as you want. Generally, I try to stick to the 5 or 6 per model, but again, it's entirely up to you. Some might add more, some might add less, but this is effectively what we're left with after a couple of minutes. Once we're happy with the base, then I'm going to start introducing a bit of a slap chop mid-tone, just focusing on slightly higher areas. Obviously, the lighter you go, the less you want to put on, right up until the point that you start adding in the final highest highlights with the bold titanium white. And you can see just as we go through, this is what we're left with after a few minutes. Very easy, very quick to do. Just as an example, this is a second one. Quite a lot on this one, so I'm just going to add a quick time lapse in just so you can see my process from start to finish. And with all that done, probably in the grand scheme of about 20 minutes, this is what we're left with. I'm really happy with the way these have turned out. It's going to be something that we're going to replicate across the entire range. And that's it. If you've got this far in the video, thank you ever so much for sticking with me. This is, after all, the premiere episode. Plenty is going to change over the course of the next 12 months. I'm going to be completing the entire World Eaters box set, and ideally pushing for a 2,000 point list minimum. If you want to see what comes up next, subscribe, hit notifications. I'm going to plan on trying posting something at least once a week. Beyond that, keep going, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay? Good, be happy? Yeah. Edit out the mistakes. Don't look stupid.